welcome back to the show.
In today's episode, we are joined by Matt Darrow, CEO of Vivun. While we also learn about his founder story, we talk about the following.
Pre-sales has been booming in the past few years, and we explore why.
How pre-sales can contribute to connect go-to-market and product development, and why it makes sense.
And also, how to give pre-sales a seat at the executive table.
So Jan, I'm not sure if you've picked up on this, and maybe you have, right? Attention on the pre-sales role really has exploded in the past 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and I have a great example for that. So Pre-Sales Collective, for example, has been founded to bring the community together, right? People on LinkedIn are positioning themselves as pre-sales coaches, and that went up significantly from what I see. And also many companies serving the pre-sales profession more and more, right?
Spot on. And today we are quite proud to say we have a founder of such a company joining us on the podcast. Sales Excellence, this is your podcast for software B2B, sales and pre-sales. My name is Tim and I'm a sales engineer at Seismic.
And I'm Jan, the pre-sales leader at SAP. Welcome to our new episode.
So today's guest is the founder and CEO of Vivun, and he actually started out as a sales engineer working at big machines, and he was one of the youngest hires at Zora, if you know that company, and went into a leadership role, then up to actually founding the company. And with that being said enough already, welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey guys, really excited to be here today. I can talk at length about pre-sales. I love it. It's a huge passion of mine. It's somewhere that I cut my teeth from a career. And it's great to be part of a company that's building products to elevate the profession. And really excited to talk to you guys today about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, perfect. And I think this is something we have in common, right? I mean, Jan and myself, we also work in pre-sales. We love the role. We love talking about it. So great to have you as a conversation partner here. And there's really 2 parts to this conversation. Firstly, let's talk about pre-sales as a role and the general direction it has taken also in the recent years and maybe even months, because it's so fast and dynamic in the environment. And then also we want to talk in the second part of the conversation more about your personal journey, how you went from being an individual contributor in pre-sales to now actually becoming a founder of a company who has, at least in my perception, played a significant role. In fact, the past 2 companies I've worked for, they both had Vivun in place. We at Seismic have it as well. So I'm very excited to hear more about that one.
Yeah, and it's maybe even comes as a surprise to some listeners. The journey from pre-sales to founder, it's quite common. And it'll be fun to explore that as well, because I think so much of the lessons and what you learn in the role of pre-sales really can set you up for success of building and leading an entire organization.
So in the very beginning, Jan and myself, we had this little dialogue on how the pre-sales profession has changed over the past few years and months, and there seems to be a certain dynamic to it. Matt, from your perspective, why do you believe there's now all of a sudden such a big attention on the role?
Well, I completely agree with you guys as well. And even if I take it back to 2019, the end of 2019, when we were doing our initial fundraise, I would start sessions with the venture capital community and say, we're going to talk about pre-sales today. What does that mean to you? And the vast majority thought we were about to talk about marketing or sales development, the roles that happen before sales. And just in the last 18 months, it's fantastic and phenomenal to see how many of those same venture capitalists have their own thesis now on pre-sales and the importance, and a clear understanding that this is very much its own separate, distinctive domain. So that was great to see from the investment community. I think what I've noticed in terms of why the role is booming is the fact that B2B enterprise buying has changed forever. And pre-sales is booming because they're the ones leading the charge that are making these companies successful in this very new world. So an example here would be back in my time at Zora, we were selling subscription management platform. So 5-6 years ago, we would be scared if clients had access to our technology before committing to us. It was complicated, it's a little hard to use, a lot of services were needed to get up and running. And you look at the development of software over the last 5 or 6 years, It's incredibly accessible now. It's incredibly easy to use, consumer focused. But then at the same time, buyers are hands-on. They're already using the solution to some extent before they even decide to commit or to go through a full purchasing cycle. So they want transparency, they want collaboration, right? They want a very, very different dynamic on how they buy. And that's the perfect place for pre-sales to come in because they're experts in the technology. They can give the transparency. They can be hands-on with the buyer. And that's where you see companies like Zoom go from 50 folks in pre-sales 12 months ago to over 400. Or Snowflake, they went from 70 to 500. Or Atlassian. Atlassian went public famously saying, we don't have salespeople. They have a pre-sales team now. And I think that's why the role is really exploding, is to meet the demand that's being driven by this new expectation on these experience-driven B2B buying processes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the example of Zoom, you could maybe still argue, okay, it's all because of the pandemic. But I think the other two examples that you've just given are a good highlight that it's more than that, right? It's not just about that. So you said, okay, obviously you as a founder, you have been speaking to venture capitalists because, well, they provide you with the funds to grow the business. And the reason for pre-sales getting now more attention, if I understood you correctly, is also the fact is that venture capitalists have now started to realize the importance of the role and therefore are more willing than maybe they were like 5 years ago to provide funds into that space, which means tech companies such as Vivun are now getting the attention and the funds to actually grow. That's what you meant, right? Basically.
Yeah. And I think the effort that's being made in the marketplace, what you guys mentioned at the beginning, the community around pre-sales that's coming together, what we're driving in the marketplace for pre-sales with technology, the role is starting to solidify in terms of the responsibilities as well, where it flew under the radar for a very long time because pre-sales is often an umbrella for 20, 25 different titles of sales engineers and field CTOs and solution architects and sales consultants. And it was very unclear how these pieces fit together. And I think that there's a lot of really good momentum on how this profession is coming together, that it's defining the role, but then that allows folks in the venture and the investment community to be very aware then of what are all the players and how do they function within a company.
So just yesterday, and I don't know if the listeners of our podcast are also cross-listening to the Presales Collective podcast, there was James and Yuji, and they actually told the origin story of how Presales Collective came about. And it was initially supposed to be a physical event that was in the beginning of 2020. And then at the last minute, so to say, they had to cancel the physical event. Okay, it said, okay, let's just all do it virtual. And all of a sudden they had like 3 times the people joining the event. And they said, okay, wow, there's really a need here for community and coming together. Yeah, it's just a fascinating time. And I think there's maybe just a connection between that, right? Everyone going virtual, but that also builds the community part and the importance of pre-sales, as you pointed out, Matt.
Well, I often consider pre-sales to be almost the heartbeat of a company. They're very much the center of influence for a business because they're unlike any other department. They work with prospects and customers on a daily basis. They work hand in hand with sales because they often have quotas that they're retiring. That's how their commissions and compensation plans are driven. They're very attuned into marketing. They're often pitching, messaging, refining, testing messaging faster than even the marketing function can. And they're engineers or technical or problem solvers at heart, which means that they have deep linkages to the product and engineering community in their companies. And if you were to lay out an org chart, there's really no other role you can supplement for that heartbeat in a company, where if you put a CSM in there, it's not really the marketing or the sales side or even the product domain that you would expect. Or if you put a salesperson in there, right, you're not going to have the linkage to product and engineering. If you put a product person in there, you're not necessarily going to have the linkage to sales and marketing. So there's this very fascinating way that pre-sales can become the center of influence for the entire organization. And when we get later on in the discussion, I think that's where you find a lot of even founders and leaders come from a pre-sales background, because you have this variety of experience of how all these departments need to, interface and work together.
So now, while you were explaining all this, and obviously we share that vision for pre-sales, right? And I would say in some organizations, most likely in Vivun, that's the case. I can say for Seismic, that is also the case. Pre-sales is seen in the way, as you just described it, as this very interconnected sort of crucial piece to the full puzzle of being successful in sales. That being said, which I can also talk about experience, you still have those type of companies where you're being approached and then it's like, Tim, please demo, and that's it, right? How can we bridge that gap in those companies where the culture is more still in the old world, so to say?
Well, I think that's a very real perception still, is what you described, where pre-sales is the team that will figure it out, right? They'll come up with their own processes and tools and way of operating. Or pre-sales is the sales assistant. It's no different than any other deliverable that a salesperson might use through the course of them getting a deal done. And I think what the best companies and the forward-thinking ones have realized exactly what you described. Like, no, hold on, this is the heartbeat of the company. It's the interconnected tissue between all these different departments. I think the challenge that pre-sales leaders need to overcome is raising their hand and saying, what is it that we're going to own? Like, what is my core responsibility? Because if you allow yourself to be relegated to just the demo team, the sales assistant team, right, you'll never break out. But there's so much opportunity for pre-sales to take ownership of in the company, especially when B2B buyers are so different and they can own this end-to-end experience. That's where pre-sales can really be realized to the full potential, but there needs to be a leader that's going to go and say, this is what the role is in my organization and how we're going to operate.
Can I add to that? Because we're always saying pre-sales, right? And we know what we mean, right? But for me, still, pre-sales is so huge. And a couple of months ago, I think, Tim, I shared it with you. I had a conversation with a person who was looking for a new head of pre-sales. And we had a conversation about it. And after 15 minutes of talking, the person said, our onboarding process is so quick. After a week, people starting calling customers. And I was like, calling customers. Okay, that sounds interesting. And it turned out that person was talking about inside sales, right? But I mean, pre-sales is correct because it's before the point we sell something, as you already said, Matt. So I think part of it, and I couldn't agree more with you, I think we really need to define it within these companies. And we need to make very, very clear that maybe we call it pre-sales, and pre-sales is like a huge area. But within pre-sales, there are so many different roles and values you can leverage as a company. So let's figure out what we really need to be successful in sales. And maybe we call it then, I don't know, solution consultant or sales engineer or solution architect. And maybe we need both, right? Or a lot more roles here. This is, maybe it's different in the US or within our bubble. Yeah, it's pre-sales, we know that. But I'm not sure if it's already clarified for each and every company.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's where you get into the pre-sales as the umbrella. And I think why a lot of the opportunity has gone under the radar for so long for investors and product delivery folks is you might have a team of pre-sales folks that have 5 or 6 different types of roles. You might have the sales engineer, solution consultant. You might have a demo engineering team supporting them. You might have a value engineering team that's part of them. You might have industry experts or industry specialists that are overlaid or supported. You might have product specialists that go in there. So I very much feel like those different roles, if you're really staffing a large and successful pre-sales team, right, if the goal of pre-sales are they're the experts in the technology that are focused on driving revenue and creating these amazing, experiences for their buyers, right? There's lots of different folks that need to be part of that puzzle, solution architects included. I think that's where a lot of pre-sales leaders might go wrong initially, where a lot of pre-sales leadership also gets promoted from within because you need the domain expertise in the products and the solutions, that you sort of have to fight up against the fact that you've been within the sales organization for so long. So if you get promoted to a leadership role, or if you were brought in from the outside to lead the pre-sales team, how do you set the boundaries of what you need? What is the scope of the role? What is everything that you're going to do? Where I could argue that pre-sales even should have a hand in the experience of self-service products to some extent, where how are we guiding people through the product when they're not on the phone with a salesperson or a pre-sales person, all the way through like the meat of a heavy pilot or POC, all the way to like value realization, and then working with the product team to figure out what are the right things that are going to make it easier to go and sell the services. So they can have a very wide span of control, but you'll need to be able to define it and to drive it so the organization can buy off on it too.
So with this expanded, let's say, vision for what the pre-sales role entails, I mean, the classical approach would be I join a new organization, I get all the product expertise training, as you just pointed out, Matt, right? Becoming the product expert is certainly still important, right? But next to that, how do you train and develop or also coach pre-sales talent going forward with that broader vision of pre-sales?
I think one of the most, thinking back to even the teams that I've built and coached over my career, cross-training and driving initiatives outside of the pre-sales department, I thought was always a great way to coach and develop somebody in the pre-sales world. Because again, they live at the center of all these different roles and functions. And there's one thing to say, hey, we have needs and initiatives within inside of the pre-sales team itself. We have to understand capabilities, we have to do onboarding, we need to understand how to run our deal cycle. But there's ample opportunity for them to tackle the needs of companies with other teams, whether or not it's messaging with marketing or roadmap with product or the forecast with sales or top of the funnel pipeline qualification or overall like company narrative. So you can go and you can extract and take potentially really high performers and start to give them and put them into these sort of cross training opportunities where they're driving initiatives with these different departments. And then internally, like within the pre-sales team, that's sort of across them all, I would focus on, not just the technology, but the business outcome and the value that the technology drives. Heavily storytelling focus, which I know you guys do a lot of at Seismic, which is great. And also leadership skills that allow them to go hotspots in the business so they can come up with their own initiatives and drive them in the company too, because they're in that really powerful position to do so. I would also say, if you have a pre-sales person that always works with the same one or two account executives, to switch that up. I think people definitely learn a lot by working with other folks and tackling different deals in different segments and markets. And I think that's a great development opportunity for folks to get out of their comfort zone too.
And to add to that, Matt and Tim as well, I think the question is also, where are you from an organizational point of view, right? So let's assume what you said, Tim, you are in a position where pre-sales people doing demos, right? And that's the mindset from sales, but maybe also from pre-sales. So that is my responsibility, nothing else, right? And if you are really going to change that and make them accountable for the deal and the customer and that overall success, I think this is really a big change within the organization, and you need to take care of that change. And I'm pretty sure you will lose people on that journey, but you will also win new people on that journey. So I think it's really important to make yourself aware, where are we as an organization? Just saying from tomorrow on, you have that entrepreneurial mindset, or you need to have it, and you're accountable for everything, will not work.
We did, well, on that, Jan, we do twice yearly benchmark studies and just publish the results for pre-sales community. And the latest one that we did, what we found was the overwhelming majority of pre-sales leaders felt they didn't use the team to its full potential. 90% wanted a larger voice in the sales forecast, which is telling you that they have a strong opinion on what's real, what we should be working, how do we actually convert the best pipe. And then also a very strong 75% majority said that they felt that there was strain in the relationship with product organization. And I think that what you're feeling in those results is exactly what you were describing, is that, hey, look, you're not going to get to this nirvana state overnight where pre-sales has these wide-ranging responsibilities. They're this big interconnected tissue. They're very strategic because they're coming from that perception of figure it out, do a demo, sales assistant, there you go. But what you're hearing from those results is that the people and the leaders, they want more, they see more, they feel more, they know that there's more there in this department. And now they're starting to define that and to raise their hand and to say, I'm going to be Like, I think one question that any listener should think about is, what do you want to say you're responsible for, almost to the executive staff level? And is there a metric? Like, is there a KPI that goes to the board or goes to your e-staff that pre-sales owns? And that's a good first step to driving the change, because oftentimes a CEO or leadership layer, when they look down, they know pre-sales is important, but they don't know, is it effective? Like, and how is it doing? Is it really changing the game? Because what they're looking at is they're looking at the CRO and they're looking at bookings growth. And then they're looking at the CSM leader and they're looking at a churn number. And then they're looking at the CFO and they're looking at margins. But then when you look to pre-sales, you just assume, okay, well, they're just lumped in with bookings. And I think that's a mistake, right? I think that's a mistake, because they can raise their hand to say, I'm the person that's responsible to align our whole company between our revenue machine and our eng team. And I'm going to hold you, and there's metrics that you could hold me responsible for that. Or I'm accountable for the buying experience. That's from before you even talk to somebody, when they're in the product and what they're seeing, all the way through a POC and a pilot to an evaluation. And there's metrics for that, like time to technical win, their revenue accelerant rates. Pre-sales can also find revenue too. Not saying it's very far in the future to think that pre-sales has like a pipe quota, but there's very much something to be said for, as markets and opportunities come about, they can help actually uncover and find new revenue too. So there's a lot of opportunity for them. But I think, again, you should ask yourselves, what am I responsible for? And can I tie that to a main metric or something that the CEO on down can really look to me for?
So obviously I have to ask, because you are now in the role of founder and CEO of Vivun, which means you probably have someone in pre-sales reporting directly to you, a pre-sales manager. What is the type of metric that this pre-sales manager comes to you and says, look, Matt, this is what we have done as a pre-sales organization at Vivun?
Yeah.
If you can share that.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because we have a slightly unorthodox org chart. One of our core values is to be different and say, how do we build a B2B business that is not like every other B2B company that's being stamped out from Silicon Valley? And that means we have a VP of pre-sales who is a peer to our VP of sales and a peer to our VP of marketing and our team that handles our customers. So from an org chart standpoint, that was first of all really important to establish that this role is a peer, and how we debate topics, that gives them a very strong voice and opinion, because every deal at Vivun goes through pre-sales, 100% of them, because people are hands-on in our technology. I think like metrics and accountability and the things that we look for, we do look to our pre-sales leader to own the alignment between our engineering and sales teams. So some of the critical things that we're looking at is how much yield of revenue, potential revenue, is the product team delivering every month and every quarter. That's a fascinating metric for us, because it's showing us the health of how well are we developing against the needs of our market. And it's a fascinating metric where we can actually look at the yield of product tied to revenue to the business that's being driven and pushed and helped prioritize through pre-sales, because they balance the needs of sales and SDRs and our account management team. That's sort of one metric. The second one is time to technical win. That's a big one for us, where what are we doing that's driving that time down and down and down, faster and faster and faster? Because if we do that, then ultimately we can grow faster, have better win rates, and get what we need to have done. And that has evolved into different techniques that we've used from selling. That's evolved a lot for us in terms of how we think about guiding buyers and arming them with assets, arming them with business cases, because we're seeing where elongation happens, and then we seek to sort of box that in. As you guys probably know, 80% of the sales cycles is spent in pre-sales. It's a very interesting stage. Normally, companies have a stage 3 in Salesforce. It's their sales demo stage, and they always wonder, well, why does 80% of the time sit in stage 3? Well, it's because this is where pre-sales is living. And the key to faster deals is understanding what goes on there.
So just roughly to add to that, if you can share maybe, I don't know, a percentage, right? But how many of your customers or even have something like technical win as a KPI or as a stage? before they becoming a customer of yours?
It's surprisingly low. Surprisingly, I think what you also find is one of the things that we discuss is, sales has their stage 3. I'll use those as an example. Demo, right? Where the whole deal kind of gets stuck and it lives there for 180 days and nobody knows why. The other thing that you find is folks often don't have clarity to even their pre-sales process, right? The pre-sales process is not the sales process. It's a part of it. It's almost an explosion within that process of what you need to do to drive the win. And also an understanding of what are the deliverables that we really do as a pre-sales team. So what can we ask of ourselves? Do we do value assessments? Yes or no? Do we do pilots? Do we do test drive? Do we do hands-on? Do we do deep dives? Do we do, industry summits? Do we do benchmarking? There's all these things that pre-sales is equipped to do. I think often what you find is, most of it's just tribal, right? The best people, close the most deals because they figured some of this out. But then when you actually go to say, let's lay it out and put a repeatable process in place, folks have never thought to define it before. And there's a big opportunity there too.
So before we jump to the second part of the conversation, which is your personal journey, I do have to go back to one topic you just explained. And I think it was, at least for me, it was a bit too abstract. So I want to go into one layer deeper, right? You talked about, as one of the metrics, you gave 2 examples, as one of the metrics to create the connection between what the product team is developing straight to pipeline. Can you elaborate a bit further on that? How do you actually do that? How do you create that connection?
Yeah. So if you can tie all the work in engineering, so imagine all of the epics and sprints and issues that are flowing through Jira that are being pushed out through your harness or CI/CD or whatever process that you're doing. And you can correlate those with all of the potential account and opportunities that are flowing through your go-to-market machine. And you can link these worlds together. And it's a tough challenge to do because what happens is those worlds don't speak the same language. Your CRM is speaking the language of accounts, contacts, opportunities, and dollars. And then Jira and GitHub and Microsoft Azure DevOps and other, name your tool, they speak the language of story points and epics and issues and sprints and roadmap. But when you bring those together, what will happen is you can understand what the arc of opportunity is for certain development areas. So like, what is the market potential? What is the yield of revenue if we were to pursue strategy A versus B? But then when you do the software delivery, you can actually see that ripple back upstream to say, how much of the potential pipeline did that delivery impact? And not just overall pipeline, but then tie it to actual deal closure. So this capability is now out the door, and how much pipeline that potentially influenced. So how much revenue potential was out there, but then how much of that do we close? So you can look at the efficiency of saying, how well is information going both ways, right? The pipeline market opportunity making its way back to Eng, but then as Eng is doing delivery, how does that impact deal closure rates too? And are we releasing the things that drive revenue for the company as well? And it's a very, very tough challenge because of those 2 system sets. But also, customers have a lot of needs. And if you've got a $100,000 deal that you're pursuing and there's a bunch of customer needs on it, you have to be really smart about how you weight them, because if you were to deliver capability 1 and 2 versus 7, 8, and 9, that yield is potentially very different because they all have different severities and they're all pervasive to different extents too.
Yeah, I mean, what you just explained, that's really next level, in my opinion, because now you have a true connection between, as you say, the go-to-market and my own product development, which means I'm not guessing what my roadmap should look like, but I'm really quantifying it. And I guess pre-sales then plays the role because we can see, okay, what is the market in need of? Where am I potentially not winning deals because a certain feature is missing? So I guess I can log that as a request, and now on the product management side, they can say, okay, open up sort of a working package, and now you can start associate that missing feature to pipeline, and then have an estimate of what it would bring you. That's in the lines what you meant, right?
Yep, big part of it. I think pre-sales is in a phenomenal place to do that, not only for the sake of product, but oftentimes because they're hands-on with the buyer and they understand what they're potentially struggling with, the product fit is more important than ever to understanding if the deal will close. Because clients right now and buyers are less likely to say, send me the SOW, we'll customize something, or bring in Accenture, we'll figure it out. They want to know that what they're buying, it works today. And because of that, like the forecast, and this is where we saw, in the benchmark survey, 90% of leaders wanted a stronger voice in the forecast because they feel that. They're like, it's harder for, you to push a relationship forward if the technology isn't really a great fit. And that same insight, while it's helpful for understanding what to develop to capture market, it's also really helpful to understand where to focus, because pre-sales often has limited time, but the rest of the company feels like they have infinite time, as we all know.
And I think it also totally makes sense from another perspective, because I have worked for different organizations and I have seen, like, let's say, multiple versions of it, right? But I often have seen like a missing linkage between field pre-sales and product. So no feedback loop, or you give feedback from the pre-sales perspective, but you never hear back, right? You can't see the impact. And at some point, people say, so why should I even provide feedback if nobody cares, right? And I think if you can establish at least a feedback loop, so like a dialogue between product, go-to-market, and pre-sales, it's already a huge step. But if you would really be able to like quantify it and having that KPI and see like the direct impact between potential business and product development, you would also put out all the emotions, right? I believe that should be our direction. Okay, no, the market, our potential customers are telling us this needs to be the direction. And I totally agree. Huge benefit.
Well, there's also, going back to how transparent buying is now, there is nowhere to hide for vendors, right? Because when they're being evaluated, people are integrating their systems. They're in there. Users are banging around on it. And why that interlock is so important now versus ever before is because of that expectation. Is if we're not really able to reprioritize and adapt based on what the market is ready to buy and what they're experiencing, then companies' growth is going to suffer. And this is also an area where pre-sales can really raise their hand to say, someone's got to own it. It's a tough problem. It's a transformational problem for a business, which is one of the reasons that, if pre-sales folks are looking for, well, how do I elevate myself and my team and my role and do something very strategic? There's fewer items that sort of hit the top of the list than this. And they can lay the groundwork that the rest of the company can benefit from. So it's not something that only pre-sales benefits from, but it's truly an organizational-wide transformation where sales and post-sales and pre-sales and product and engineering, all these function marketing can come together in a very, very different way, all for the sake of saying our buyers are hands-on, they want a sure thing. Our products have to meet the needs of the market that's willing to buy. So how do we continuously reprioritize in this world where it's more agile than ever? Like for us, we did 10 production releases last week behind the scenes, and it's continuous delivery. And I've spoken with a lot of, Snowflake is a very similar way. And that's what allows them to be so agile and nimble. And you need to keep making sure that you're placing the right bets.
So I would like to talk a little bit about your personal founding journey. And I mean, I think in the US, it's quite a bit of a different culture, because entrepreneurial spirit is very much part of the core culture. At least that's how I perceive it in the US. In Germany, it's sort of getting there with shows like, well, Shark Tank in the US. In Germany, it's called, what's it called, Jan? You remind me?
Höhle der Löwen.
Höhle der Löwen, thank you. I'm not watching it, but Jan is always telling me about it, and I love the concept. And all of these founders also now getting the attention in our cultural spheres. And the one thing that is, I would say, in 99% the case is that they are sort of founding a company not because they want to become rich and the greatest and the best, but they see a problem in their daily lives that they want to fix. And I would like to understand, what was the itch for you that you needed to scratch when you were still working as an employee at a company that said to you, okay, now I need to found Vivun, I need to solve this problem. What was the problem?
I joined Zora very, very early on, single digits in ARR, and was with the company through, hundreds of millions in ARR through going public. And I had a big task, which was build the global sales engineering team there. And I had nothing. I had limited support from ops. I had, spreadsheets coming out, as you could imagine, all over the place. I had, certain things I was trying to accomplish in Salesforce. I had a dynamic between product and sales that I was trying to address. I had you know, the importance of the sales forecast kept growing as we were preparing to go public. And, our team had a tendency to really know best because sales reps were always sort of coming and going and territories were changing. So our origin story was actually very simple, where Vivun came from being in the shoes of every other pre-sales leader that's out there right now, which was, how do I build and run an exceptional global organization and become strategic and distribute the insights that really only our team has across the company, and do that for the sake of saying, how are we going to create this a way that we can accelerate revenue and be elevated. And the way that I did that, even very similar to, the CEO of Zora, Teen Zoe, he built the first billing system in Salesforce. That was the idea and the impetus for Zora. My co-founding CTO, his prior mentors, Karthik Rao and Phil Liu, were building monitoring at Facebook, and that became Signal Effects. And it was the same story for us. Like, we begged, borrowed, and stealed some engineers to homegrown some clunky way to manage our world, and it was really painful, but it had a huge impact because of what we were able to accomplish, and ultimately, going and growing to a publicly traded company, and then beyond. So at that time, I wasn't doing that saying, okay, great, I'm going to leave and then just go do Vivun. I wasn't even sure. Right after the IPO, I personally took some time off to intentionally be bored. I went and spent a few months off, doing some treks and hiking, traveling. I love the outdoors. And it was like the only time in my life, probably outside of being 4 years old, that I didn't have something planned the next day. It wasn't even the next hour. So I would look out, the next month, nothing to do, the next day, nothing to do, the next hour, nothing to do, whatever you want to do. And it got to the point where your mind could really relax and see things differently. And I was writing down, a couple of different ideas of things that I was really passionate about. And one of those things was, how do I solve that same problem for pre-sales leaders that I went through? I was like, it was awful. It was so hard to elevate the role and connect the company and to run the team. And I stepped back and I was really looking at the market, and I was like, man, this is a common problem across all of pre-sales. Pre-sales is massive. There's over 250,000 companies out there that have pre-sales team today across all sorts of industries. So it's a huge market, and nobody's really paid attention to it. And at that point, that's when I decided I've got to go and start this, because I started to write the first lines of code and build the first version of the website and start to craft like an initial potential, like the pitch deck that I could test with. And I couldn't stop working on it. I was doing it 17 hours a day. And I was like, this needs to become something. And that's what ultimately led to the company, where I would say half of the drive and motivation is just what I described, like elevating and giving back to a profession where I personally came from. And then the second half is building a B2B company that feels and operates different. And that's why we have a VP of pre-sales that's a peer to our executive staff. That's why, for us, we were a distributed company before COVID made that sort of, fashionable, if you will. And there's certain things that I think that's part of the fun journey as well. Of how do you build a different type of business?
So, I mean, all the good things that we discussed for the past well, 30 plus minutes is of course quite a vision for pre-sales because, well, as we all agree, some companies are still in the early stages of maturity, sort of. Some others are progressing, and of course, well, in my perception at least, Vivun is quite at the forefront here of developing the role and providing the right tools to mature further. So I think just getting those companies to that what you have in mind already today is one thing, right? That's already a fundamental task. But nevertheless, I guess as every founder, there's a way forward, right? There must be sort of a vision. Where do you see Vivun go in the next, I don't know, let's say 5 to 10 years?
I think, really enabling pre-sales is a means to a much larger end game where I strongly believe that for enterprise companies in B2B to be successful, they need to change the way that they sell and build their products. And that's not a change that's going to happen overnight. And the best way that a company will get there is through pre-sales. And I see so many of these, ancillary stories of companies. When I was doing a presentation with Eve Besant, who runs all of the pre-sales team over at Snowflake, she talks about how they support the customer from first touch through their entire life cycle, right? They don't have a traditional CSM model over there. They have technical folks that work the entire gamut of the company life cycle. Or you'll see really dynamic organizations that understand this need to align what customers need with what we're developing and prioritizing the marketplace. I was speaking with one of the chief product officers at a very, very large technology company, publicly traded. They were also talking about how they don't really have a formal roadmap, right? They have strategy, but then they have all the different projects that they're thinking of delivering in this really flux backlog where they can reprioritize things on the fly as needs change. And that agility is what gives them a lot of success. And then also just going back to the fact that I firmly believe that the old sort of way of selling and buying where there was, this relationship that needs to change too.
Fantastic. Now I'm looking to my co-host, Jan. Do you have any last questions for Matt before I think we can wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, no more questions. Just want to say thank you. I really, really enjoyed that. And as Tim said, so I think you said next level, Tim, right? And I think it's a level we all should aim for because I really, really appreciate the direction you are going with everything you are doing.
Matt?
Well, and you guys too with the podcast, I just want to say thanks for having me as well, because you guys are a huge part of it, right? This is another avenue and a way for the community to come together to talk about the role and what is possible and how it evolves. And it wouldn't be possible without sort of everybody really pitching in and pushing it forward. And it's a great show that you guys have too. And I was really excited to get the opportunity to chat with you guys today. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And I think we also have to thank our good friend of the show, Bob Reefstyle, because I think he initially made the connection between us. So thank you, Bob, for that one. Yeah, and with that being said, we really hope you liked what you heard here today, dear listeners. If you do enjoy the show, please follow us on LinkedIn, give us a favorable rating on Apple Podcasts. That really helps out the show and grow the audience. And with that being said, thank you, Matt. Thank you, dear listener. And we hope to hear you soon.
Bye-bye.